Hey, everybody. We have a great episode for you today. It was with my friend Jeremy Gilston. Jeremy is a partner in a hospitality consulting firm called Woodworth here on the East Coast. They do all types of hospitality consulting for the travel industry, hotel industry. Jeremy actually comes from the prestigious Cornell University School of Hotel Management, which is kind of a big deal for everybody I know who is in the hospitality world. They all went to Cornell. And in this episode, we talk about what it takes to make a project successful, the financial viability and looking at market trends and obviously location, but also the potential of finding new and novel real estate properties that can become hospitality success stories. And this covers everything from resorts to glamping to even mixed-use development. So check out the episode with Jeremy. You're going to have a good time listening to something you probably always experienced when you stay in a hotel or a resort, but never really understood. Hope you enjoy it. Jeremy, thank you for joining us on the Undeniable Podcast. We're really excited to have a conversation today.
Thank you so much, Devin. I'm really excited to be here, and you and I can go back and forth for hours on end, so we figured let's just capture this and maybe someone will get something useful out of this conversation, because I know we always have a blast.
Well, that's the best. I think the best conversations on any podcast are the ones where the interviewer, the interviewee actually have this rapport of learning from each other, and you have a great deal of knowledge in this one specific area, the travel industry and hospitality. And for a quick background for our listeners, you and I, your firm, formerly Woodworth Associates, now called Woodworth Core, have done projects together. So we'll probably touch on those in the next 30 minutes. But also, we have a couple of potential projects that we're working on together. So yeah, we're familiar with each other. But I guess that's the real reason we're talking today, Jeremy, is that you have such expertise. You and your whole company have such expertise in this area, and a lot of folks don't even know it exists. They don't really understand how hospitality works, and not at the planning stages and the design stages. So, to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started and what got you into the industry, and a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Devin, and that was a very kind intro, and you are equally smart in lots of great ways, and so I look forward to joining that up together here. Devin, you might not actually know this, but I set out to be a party planner. When I was in high school, I said, I want to go to college to be a party planner. And at the time, my grandmother was a party planner in the New York City area, and so I guess she was a bit of an inspiration for me. And so you know where I am now, so I've had a very windy road that is clearly not in the event planning space. And so my grandma pulled some strings and got someone to introduce me to the CEO of a company called BizBash, which is a media company that tracks the event industry. I went into New York City. I was 18. I was all nervous, and I went in suit and tie and met with this guy. And he was so wonderful. And what he did is he said, let me introduce you to a professor at Cornell University who does the special events and catering track, and maybe he'll help you understand what college could look like, how to apply, where to go. Long story short, I ended up getting into Cornell University and their hospitality administration program, and really did not end up in a special events and catering track. I went off the rails, and I really used those 4 years to explore all the things that Cornell had to offer. And then, of course, at 18 to 22, you're still figuring so much out. I had internships in several different things. My first internship was in special events and catering, and so very early on in my career, I sort of checked that off the list as something that maybe that's not how I want to spend my career. I actually avoided a lot of the real estate and finance courses, which is ironic, during the time, and was just exploring everything else. And after college, ended up at a small firm called LW Hospitality Advisors, now fairly substantial, and they do real estate consulting and valuations. So I followed some of my friends from college in their footsteps into that role. They were having a good time. They were traveling. They were in the hospitality industry. Travel was very exciting to me at 22. So my real estate career really started after college. I didn't really take a lot of advantage of Cornell's classes, which is why I went back later and got a master's in real estate finance.
So I'm interrupting you really early, and I might do this more than once, but tell me why Cornell is such the epicenter of great hospitality leadership. What makes that place the coveted college university for hoteliers?
Yeah, it's a bit of history. It's one of the earliest schools that offers that. I think it's its location relative to the New York City area. which just has a really strong foundation in real estate and hospitality. It's where all brands want to put their first flagship in New York City. The location relative to New York City. And then I believe, at least from my career perspective, it's the alumni network. I currently work for an alumni. Most of the jobs I've held since college have been for an alumni. And there's this strong bond of understanding the education and training you're getting there, the internships you have access to. And then the alumni network continues to, at least for me, has been pivotal in my career journey.
Is it a little bit like the hotel mafia?
There's probably a hotelie from Cornell lurking in most organizations in the hotel industry. So, I don't think we would say mafia, but we're everywhere, and it's
like you're an insider. It's who you know. You have connection.
That's right. Yeah. And just by graduating through this program, you get access to this platform. So it didn't follow me throughout my life, and I was just lucky enough through that introduction in high school to a professor at Cornell that really started me on that journey.
So you said you avoided finance classes, which I did as well. I didn't really enjoy finance and my business program, but that seems to be what you excel at today. So how did that change?
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I've thought about this a lot throughout the 10 years of my career so far. And at the time, the concepts of finance were just concepts. That's all they were to me. I didn't understand the context. I didn't understand the physical nature of real estate that it was tied to. It was just hard math at the time. Yeah. And funny enough, today we work in Excel models that do the hard math for you, so we don't have to continue to calculate these complex formulas on our TI-89s, right? We have these models. And so we're much more in the physical asset today, which is so much more exciting and enjoyable to me. And I didn't connect those dots in undergrad because it was all theory. It was all math problems. And I was fine at math. It just didn't excite me. I couldn't touch and feel it the way I could special events, which is why I was so interested in special events. And now today I'm constantly touching and feeling real estate. I just didn't understand that sitting up in a classroom in upstate New York.
Yeah, that's fascinating in itself, Jeremy, because in entertaining, which I guess is the essence of events, you're getting constant feedback, real-time feedback from, people love the food, the beverage, the music. But in finance, you might take years before you realize the pro forma was right or wrong.
That's right.
And then over, maybe 100 real estate projects that over Bob has worked on and I've worked on, if you don't get the math right, it's not even worth starting. Like, and so many hospitality resort developers have this curse, very much like master plan community developers. They have this belief that if I build it, they will come. And then they don't really drill into, is this thing got any net operating income? Is there an ROI? So I guess hospitality is more mature in that regard than single-family resort developers. But I've come to appreciate it. And when I've seen your work, I mean, it's like another language. What you're doing is, for me, is like speaking a foreign language.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me maybe just add this for our listeners, is sort of what Woodworth Core Group does, which maybe we got a little ahead already.
Yeah. Please, give some background on the company now. And you just got promoted, too.
Thank you. After completing my finance master's degree. And so hopefully we'll get into that a little bit, too. But what we do really is a couple of key things. Pre-development consulting is a big part of what we do and frequently why we're engaged with your firm there over above, Devin. And we are trying to figure out what is the most ideal, most financially feasible product or property that belongs on a given site. In real estate, you either have a use looking for a site, so I want to build a resort and I want to figure out where, or I have a site looking for a use. So I have this big tract of land and I want to know what belongs on it. We come into that process, either someone's looking to expand their brand and we help them. But more often when we're working with your firm, Devin, somebody already has a site and they want to figure out how do we maximize the beauty or the uniqueness of our site? How do we understand what's going on in the market, both from a demand side of the hotel, but also from a trend side? What are people building today? What is the most financially viable and feasible product? And so that's where my firm comes in on the pre-development side. And then real quickly, I don't think we'll talk a lot about it on the podcast, but we also do third-party asset management, which is a hat I've worn in past lives throughout my career, and then litigation, where we end up as an expert tax witness or tax valuation purposes, or any sort of unique circumstance, so a dog bite or maybe something like a murder case. So we've been involved in all those sort of unique projects as well.
That's wild. I never heard you talk about murder cases in hospitality. But I guess it comes back to your domain expertise. So whether it's tax or finance or legal, it's your expertise saying these are benchmarks, these are analogs, right?
That's right. We're constantly keeping up on the many brands that the brands companies put out. So we have to understand the latest and greatest, the newest brand strategy, and then alternative accommodations, which are continuing to abut our industry, short-term rentals, glamping, RVs. We have to keep our arms wrapped around the entire ecosystem to understand what is the most viable product for a certain site. And today, it's a mixture of everything I just mentioned, and maybe we'll get into there too, but it's glamping and it's residences and it's a resort.
Yeah, the world is getting more complicated and is going to continue to.
Right.
So to wrap up a little bit more around Woodworth Core, tell us some of the projects. Can you talk about past projects? It's not confidential or anything. And then if there's any future projects that you can make nameless, but tell us the categories.
Definitely. Obviously, the nature of our work, there's some things we can talk about, some things that we cannot. But interestingly, in today's interest rate environment, where just like buying a home is very difficult, so is buying or building a hotel in today's environment. That's both because of the costs and because of the interest rates. And so in today's environment, more and more we're working with public entities that are looking to bring some sort of demand generation or economic development into their market. And those I can definitely talk about because there's typically press releases associated with them. The municipalities do everything under public view. So something we wrapped up last year, which was a really fun project, was with Cobb County and the Cobb Galleria Center. That's a large conference center with a hotel adjacent outside of Atlanta in Cobb County. And the Cobb Galleria Authority had commissioned us to help them understand what is the trend in the meeting and events environment. Does our facility meet those needs today? If we were to expand or renovate, what should we do to meet those future trends? And then if we wanted to build a hotel adjacent, what would or should that look like? So that was a public project that we worked on, and they're continuing on through their process. We've given our recommendations for that. And something that was very cool that we do every now and then is we actually ran a survey of the meeting planners that currently use that meeting facility and got a pulse from them. I mean, what better way to understand the future needs of that facility than to have a real-time connection with the meeting planners?
And this would be for corporate events, right?
Yeah, a conference center could be conventions, which are somewhat leisure-oriented. Think Comic-Con or a knife show, consumer product events, but corporate is a big use of that as well. And in the post-pandemic environment, that looks very different than what it did in 2019. And so we had to sort of wrap our arms around that and make sure that we were recommending a facility for the future, not just their existing customers.
Well, so tell me, what's an example of how the future is different, just in the conference?
Yeah, so many of us still don't go into the office, and without the future requirement for many people to continue in an office 5 days a week, the need for businesses and travelers and customers of those businesses to convene is more frequent. So we don't have an office in New York City anymore. In 2020, we got rid of the office and everybody moved to wherever they wanted, and now our company is fractured across multiple states, so we convene more frequently for product updates, for company meetings. There's also more of an interest in conferences because we are limited in our social interactions in a day-to-day without an office environment or with a smaller office environment. So we're more interested in going to conferences. I had 3 in the last 4 weeks, so I'm just a road warrior right now on conferences.
It is, and now that you're saying that, it makes so much sense. Being more home-based by choice forces some people to say, I have this absence of genuine interaction, and I can actually network at a different level because everybody at these events actually wants to have interactions as well. That's really fascinating. How it's another example of the pendulum swinging all the way back.
One of the trends is that the events are actually larger in nature, and many events are outgrowing their home location that they've had 10 years holding at that conference center. And so one of our key recommendations is more meeting space to keep the groups that are outgrowing you. And we did a similar exercise with the Roanoke Hotel, which is a curio, which is public. It's a public ownership. It's very complicated. But the city of Roanoke owns the conference center, and Virginia Tech Foundation owns the hotel. And we partnered with them to figure out what is the best way to expand the facility to take advantage of some tax and bond credits that were coming due or up for renewal, and at the same time capturing on group and food and beverage trends. So another really, really fun project, another public project that we helped on where the answer had to do with the shift in group behavior.
And again, to round out some of your background and your firm's expertise, we happen to have worked on a project in upstate New York. You want to just summarize that? And is that typical of where you do resort hospitality? Is that a typical project?
Sure. I mean, that would be the third project that I'm talking about here that isn't of an existing hotel. A lot of what we do is before the hotel even exists. But this project in upstate New York is a very iconic, historic asset, 2 hours from New York City in New Paltz. It's an all-inclusive resort. And the charge there was to figure out how to make sure that they're keeping on top of trends and understanding the shift in their consumer behavior to make sure that they're investing in the right pieces of their facility, their infrastructure, and any trends that may be mid to long term that they should invest in more heavily. This particular resort is well known for its spa and wellness, which they're quite lucky that is a key driver of what's happening today in the environment. So they're already poised to take advantage of that trend in wellness, but there were ways that we recommended together that they could expand on that or diversify that strategy and speak to a wider audience. And that was just such a fun project.
So Jeremy, just for our listeners, tell us the name of that client.
Sure. Yep. So that resort is called Mohonk Mountain House. It's in upstate New York. It's really a watering hole for the New York and Pennsylvania and a little bit of Boston area. And if you're outside of that area, you might not have come across it. Which it really is a drivable or drive-to destination from major urban environments.
What was so? And that's we spent some time together on the property, working on over above us, doing a lot of the data-driven analysis of historical guest data for decades. It is one of the most, you might know off the top of your head, how many hotels and hotels/resorts exist in the United States that have been in operation for a century. You could even say how many still have several decades. Well, this property, which everybody should look up and make a reservation. I wish we had a coupon code. That'd be cool.
Yeah, right.
Use undeniable and get 10% off. But this property called the Mohonk Mountain House is 150 years old. Isn't that just phenomenal? Can you think of any other one that's that old in the United States?
There are probably a small handful. I think Blackberry Farms is one of those, but Blackberry Farms in Tennessee has grown to become the resort it is today. It was originally a much smaller infrastructure, a much less renowned resort. So history drives a lot of travel today, and you can't just build history. And so more and more you find a resort or developer trying to find a place that has history or a small inn that can be the foundation of the place that has history and expand on it today. And I think that's what Blackberry Farms is a good example of.
And many other ones, even out west. Is the Arizona Biltmore? That's a pretty old place.
That's right.
The others. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about the property and the staff and the amenities, and it's fantastic. But it's also extremely unique. Now, what are you guys working on in the future that you can't really disclose? But what are the categories of things that you're excited about, or things that would be noteworthy a few years from now?
Yeah, continuing on this trend of public-private partnerships, we are currently working with a state that is looking to change the narrative in one of their areas of the state that has lost a major industry, and so we're working with them. The thesis is that because of the topography of this area and the natural beauty that most people don't know about, they think of it because of that industry that used to be there. There's a lot of opportunity for ecotourism and adventure tourism. So we're working with the state and potential investors. We recommended a facility programming in conjunction with an architecture firm and a development firm. And it really touches on all the trends we see today, but it's uniquely rural, which I think is a post-pandemic type of trend that we're seeing, where people were exposed to travel closer to home, and now they're seeking more of that product. But there's only a couple that have been there for 150 years, and it's pretty hard to drum up a 150-acre historic, architecturally stimulating resort. That's a massive undertaking and a massive project. So I think if this project we're working on comes to fruition, and we have another Undeniable podcast up, I'll reference it, and I think we will encourage everybody to go visit it.
When I was talking about iconic historic hotel properties, I just sadly omitted one of our favorite over above projects, which was the Homestead, is the Homestead Hotel in Hot Springs, Virginia. George Washington slept in the first version of the Homestead. So yeah, you've shared with our audience your unique expertise in understanding the different ramifications, all the dimensions of hospitality. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the state of the industry and start talking about some trends and things that are evolving, because everybody has their own view of hotels. I remember as a kid just being brainwashed with the Howard Johnson's sign and that whole motif. And I want you at some point to explain the monolithic giant called Marriott, like what makes them so different. And there's so many fragments of the Marriott brand, which must be a part of our brilliant strategy. But tell us, what is the current state of the industry today? What are you seeing and all the conferences you attend?
Sure. I think it's a tale of two cities. The consumer is eager to travel after a couple of years at home and afraid to congregate indoors for obvious reasons. There's been this resurgence of travel, and that has taken different shapes in today's environment than when we look back at 2019. So first of all, you have this concept called bleisure, which is the business and leisure combining. And when people go on these corporate retreats or corporate events, they want to bring their family, or they want it to be in an area where they'd like to spend another day to explore. It's actually, in hindsight, a pretty odd concept that just for a work trip for 48 hours, you'd get on a plane and go to Chicago, sit in a ballroom, and then come home when you've never been to Chicago before and you want to go explore Chicago. And so with our work from home flexibility today, we're already paying for our flight, or we're already expensing our flight. We're already expensing 2 nights at the hotel. So it's pretty logical for us to add a 3rd night or 4th night to the hotel. That's all that we're paying for as the corporate traveler. Maybe we bring our partner, or maybe it's a family trip. And you can extend that business trip into a leisure trip. Or that business trip is a Thursday and Friday, and then you turn it into your weekend and you stick around for the weekend. So that's certainly a trend that we're seeing that has helped the recovery from the pandemic and has certainly shape the way that hotels are capturing or recapturing demand.
So when you say it's a trend, you're measuring the difference year over year over year. It's like it's growing.
That's right. Sunday nights and Thursday nights used to be the weaker nights of the week pre-2019, and today they are almost as strong, if not stronger, than 2019, especially on an ADR level. And so people are extending those trips and those shoulder nights, or maybe we need to redefine shoulder nights, because shoulder nights used to be the weaker nights of the week, and those shoulder nights are now fairly strong. At the same time, that Tuesday, Wednesday, which used to be the peak nights of the week driven by corporate and group, is a little weaker than it was in 2019 because corporate has not quite recovered. So your Thursdays and Sundays are stronger than 2019, and your Tuesdays and Wednesdays are weaker than in 2019.
Interesting. Now, so that's one trend. Tell us a few more.
Yeah, sure. I think so the consumers want to travel. That's sort of the first part. But the tale of two cities is that the investors want to develop, and they're really struggling to do so. So you have a bit of a supply-demand mismatch in the marketplace, which is driving some rate premiums to the consumer. So the consumer is paying more for the same product today than they did 4 years ago. And to some extent, at least in the consumer surveys, the value is not always there. So we are seeing in those exit surveys of guests that their satisfaction of that product is lower than what it was 4 years ago. And part of that is because the price is significantly higher, but they're not perceiving the value to be higher. And that is sort of motivating investors and developers to get in and put more supply into the market because prices are high. Flow through it's a profitable time to be a hotel owner, but it's particularly complicated to build a hotel today. Interest rates are 7.5%. If you're lucky, it's usually more like 8 to 9% on a riskier deal, on a less stabilized or resort deal.
This is a commercial debt, not
commercial debt. That's right. Yeah. So exactly, commercial interest rates are going to be higher than your residential. And then the general cost of construction, and we still have some lags in supply chain. We still have some significant increases in lumber, in construction labor. And so the cost to build a hotel today is quite high, and the cost to finance it is quite high. But at the same time, the demand for such product is also quite high. So there's this mismatch between supply and demand that will shake out over the next couple of years, but we are in this period of stalemate where demand is pretty stable and or slightly growing, but supply has not been able to catch up in most markets. And another thing is for the group trends, more and more groups are moving to resorts or leisure destinations, because why would you want to be stuck in a conference room when you could be at a Margaritaville or a Hard Rock and be at this more activated resort-oriented place where your friends and family come in? And that's not brand specific. Marriott's, Hilton's, Hyatt's, they all have resorts like that. But I think the nature of the big ballroom inside a hotel, there has to be something a little bit more today to attract that group.
Yeah, look at the business that happens in Vegas and Orlando. I mean, I've seen so many conferences there. We've even done small over above business meetings with clients there, and get great food and beverage. And even if you can never go outside to the lazy river, at least you can see it, right? So it's a lot different than being in a brick building in Midtown.
Well, you touched on something really interesting. Windows in ballrooms are a very important trend. And if you have a ballroom today, it is worth putting a window in there. Being able to see the outside, have natural light in a meeting room helps sell space, attracts groups. And
Fascinating.
And, like I said, I mean, you and I don't want to sit 2 days in a ballroom. And so if you can have a nature-oriented meeting, or at least one window, or some outdoor networking events, that is driving the group consumer today.
So another trend that I have witnessed, and I want your commentary on this, and it was something that happened to Nancy Joe, my wife and I, just 3 weeks ago. We went to a wedding in Cary, North Carolina, at one of, I think that we have 4 or 5 five-star hotels in the state of North Carolina. And this one in Cary is called the Umstead, and it's a fantastic property. If anyone ever happens to be in Research Triangle Park, Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill, go see my friend David Mars. He's the managing director there. It's an incredible experience. The next morning before we left, we're hanging out, by the pool, and there were so many residents from Cary who drove 10, 15 miles to stay at this 5-star resort, and Raleigh and Durham as well. So it really surprised me that this word staycation is gaining momentum, possibly, or is that true? Am I just imagining that?
No, that's definitely true, at least of the last 2 years. I think there's different schools of thought about what the next 2 years look like now that we are more comfortable going back to Europe and getting on a long flight. But I do think during the 2020-2021 period, we were forced to vacation closer to home. We were scared to get on an airplane. We were scared to get on a bus. It also taught us about short-term rentals. There were many people that for the very first time during that period decided, a house with my own kitchen and where I don't have to breathe in other people's air, so to speak, which was front of mind back then, really grew or took hold. The Umstead specifically is a great example because it's 20 minutes outside of an urban core. And so even if you are forced to be in a ballroom in downtown Raleigh, make it a staycation, stay at the Umstead, bring your family, and then Friday and Saturday night is on your dime. But you're very close to the action, and I think there's going to be more of that trend of a resort type product in a more urban environment. Even in Charlotte, you have the Ballantine, which is 20 minutes south of Charlotte, and the spa there is full of locals. The pool there is full of locals, and there's a new company, or somewhat new, called Resort Pass that actually sells day passes to local resorts. So it's just another opportunity for revenue generation. If that resort has a big meeting space and most of their rooms are sold on Tuesday, Wednesday for a conference, then their pool and their spa is dead or relatively dead. So why not tap the local pool on those days, the local population on those days, and get them to enjoy your facility and make extra money, and it's a win-win.
Is there any value in talking about the Airbnb factor? Like, do you have an opinion on that, or what's the latest impact in the industry?
Most definitely. I think in 2020 and 2021, Airbnb or short-term rentals got all of us to go to a place we've never been to before. So I don't know if you have a personal story like that, but we discovered Pennsylvania that was not the Poconos. We found all these really cool houses scattered around Pennsylvania that were not necessarily the Poconos or any town you've ever heard of, but it was a wonderful house. It had outdoor amenities, call it a hot tub or a pool, and now more and more pickleball courts we're seeing at these facilities. But the short-term rental business competes more head-to-head with hotels than anyone ever thought in the past. And because of the way that you go on, let's just Airbnb, for example, you don't put in the city. That's not the first thing it prompts you to do. It prompts you to pick cabin, beach, getaway, and it forces you to think about your trip. And then you see a map, and you zoom in on the map. So you're not starting with Chicago or New York City or Washington, D.C. You're starting with a concept for travel. And so it actually really did change the way that we do travel, and we were forced to get exposure to it during 2020 and 2021. And many of us really like that type of travel. And there's a certain type of travel specifically that it is most amenable to, which is family travel, group travel, and just general unplugging, which resorts can scratch that need as well. But especially in the group or family reunion travel, and our friends earlier from the case study upstate with Mohonk, they have this really, really cool kind of family reunion, kind of corporate retreat villa that has multiple bedrooms within one house, and each bedroom has its own key, and it's sellable as its own hotel room, but you're shared within one house. So you get this group bonding experience, but at the end of the day, you're not sharing bedrooms, you're in this hotel-like environment, but you're in this corporate group or family reunion type house that you can enjoy. And that's a really popular product that I think we're going to see continue to grow and is somewhat captured in the short-term rental space today.
Yeah, some of my developer friends, and I mentioned Orlando earlier, they're consistently building 10, 12, 14 bedroom homes because, the whole stay in one big house with your nephews and nieces and cousins. And I thought, wow, that had to be an anomaly. But yeah, so when you said how this, we can't get away from the changes that happened in 2020 for society, this global pandemic, because these changes are still rippling through society. Even you talk about commercial real estate, there's going to be sadly a lot of commercial office space that will struggle because of the changes from work at home. But you just made me think, and this will be a cool graphic. There's this comparison between these two. I mean, this is one of my passions: disruption. These two disruptive forces, Jeremy. One was Zoom, and the other one was Airbnb. Mm-hmm. Think about how Zoom and Airbnb have changed an industry, mm-hmm. and maybe it'd be a really cool research project for someone to do. But that's kind of fascinating that sometimes simple movements and evolution, and these are both software examples, can have such a dramatic impact.
That's certainly right. And I think we're still dealing with what that will look like in the hotel and resort space for years to come. But those two things are here to stay. And those are household dinner conversation type names now, where maybe not everybody knew what they were or how they worked in 2019.
Yeah. Okay, so before we wrap up on some of these trends, tell me about wellness. Like, where does wellness fit into all of this, and what are you reading? And I have some recent experience I'd love to share with our audience around a wellness conference. But where does health, wellness, and unplugging, like that's a term you might have mentioned a minute ago. It's for mental and even physical, psychological health. This is becoming paramount. People are recognizing it.
That's right. I mean, hugely important, something we learned in 2020 and 2021, especially mental health, but also physical health. And across the ecosystem of the hospitality industry, there's many ways to deliver that. Interestingly, at a conference I was at last week, the thesis was, and we're now talking on the lower half of the spectrum of the economy, mid-scale, and upscale type hotels, that all these forced pools, meaning you have to have a pool as part of the brand standard, those are probably going to go away in exchange for increased fitness facilities. So you go to a Hampton Inn, you have this tiny little, just pick on one brand, but they're all sort of like this. You have this tiny little fitness room that has 2 machines and a little weight rack. And then you have this massive pool right next to it that's empty and makes the whole hallway smell like chlorine. More savvy developers today or owners are trying to convert this space, but you remove that pool and you have this expansive fitness area. Maybe you have a hot sauna or something like that. And so that's sort of the lower end of how wellness can be delivered today.
Interesting.
And then you go all the way up.
I can think of a dozen examples of high-quality 3-star properties that have pools and no one uses it.
That's right. And we all want a pool, but if you put 2 pools side by side and you said pick which pool you want, 99% of the people would pick one pool over the other. The point is there's different ways to build pools. There's sort of little indoor pools that are brand required, and then there's amenity wellness driver pools. And we would all pick the amenity pool rather than the brand made me do it pool. And so people are simply not using that small indoor pool, and it really could be repurposed for health and wellness.
In terms of the bigger wellness trends, I was going to mention that a few weeks ago, as the Global Wellness Institute has an annual symposium around real estate wellness, and we'll put a link in the show notes around the 2024 Trends Report. It's free for anybody to download, and it's fascinating how this is exploding. But you see wellness tourism happening in more and more serious ways, and ironically, I think, you correct me, I see it more globally and throughout, not just Europe, but everywhere, the Far East. And these brands that some people are familiar with, Six Sense is one, Aman is another, Mandarin Oriental. But everybody's jumping on this wellness tourism bandwagon where you're basically going to a resort spa safari or resort spa, private island. So how is that going to make its way back to the U.S. and more manageable levels? And our friends at properties like Mohonk, for example, I mean, they've been doing it for 150 years, but it seems to be the wave of the future, right?
That's totally right. And that's sort of the other end of the spectrum. So you have these lower tier hotels that are moving away from pools and expanding their fitness facilities. But then you have these higher end hotels where the spa is integral to the purpose of visit. Or when you talk about bleisure, that's the location that you pick because you're in a meeting and your partner wants to spend spa day there. And so it's another driver of business, and it looks very different at many different places. One thing that's sort of shaping that today is sort of this lack of labor that's able to produce that level of quality. So masseuses and technicians are in high demand. And so new spas and new resorts are coming out with unique ways that are not technician or labor fueled. So it's a heated mineral pool and an infrared sauna and a cold plunge and a maze to get lost in and a yoga room. And none of those have anything to do with the technician providing a hot stone massage or a facial. So I think not only are we continuing to see that in more and more places, but the creative ways that is coming to be in these resorts, it's very unique and really self-guided. If you look at the Omni in Asheville, their day pass for the spa, which is no access to any treatment, it's simply to their facility, is over $200 a day. And they typically sell out to just the guests within the hotel, and it's very rare they even open that to the public. So that's a driver to stay at that hotel, just to have access to the spa facility without even a treatment scheduled.
Yeah, and we say the Omni in Asheville. I know that as the Grove Parking.
That's right.
You're referring to it.
The Grove Parking.
Yeah, another iconic, maybe a century-old property. I mean, certainly 1930s. Henry Ford was a regular guest there. Henry Firestone, a regular guest.
That's right.
So that might segue into our part two conversation, Jeremy, around one particular property that happens to be in Asheville, North Carolina. This is not the North Carolina episode, but we've mentioned a couple of southern properties today. But but before we kind of wrap up and start our second part two episode, anything else you want to close with on trends today? What's happening where people, maybe something that people aren't aware of? I guess you shared a lot of things that I wasn't aware of, but are there some macro hospitality trends that they're surprising you at this point?
Sure, I'll actually leave you with two, but I'll make it a quick closing. Yeah. So first of all, the way that we are moving forward into 2024 and beyond is the haves and the have-nots. And so those that have a less discretionary spending are starting to pull back on their travel. On the other side of the spectrum, the upper upscale and luxury resorts, like we were talking about, the Six Senses, the Mohonks of the world, they seem to have no negative impact on today's inflationary environment, and they are continuing to spend on travel at more than ever. And so the winners and losers will shake out over the next couple of years, and these are cyclical trends. But today, the lower end of the spectrum is starting to see some pullback in their revenue and their profit margin, and the luxury and upper and ultra luxury are continuing to do well and are likely to do so as supply simply can't keep up. The other trend that I would like to share that I think is interesting is we're now quite well into the hotel brand proliferation, where Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, IHG, they're on every corner, they're in every city. And so as they sort of reduce...
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing for the average traveler. I think as an investor, you have to continue to be more savvy and figure out ways to differentiate yourself. or not. Maybe your strategy is to have a Hampton Inn in every city. I think the investment strategy has changed because of that. But on the brand side, most people don't know this, at least at a random sort of event that I go to without hotel people. But Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, they don't own their hotels. They're simply a franchise or brand company, kind of like Subway. And that was not how it always was. But they made conscious decisions to spin off all the real estate holdings into REITs and real estate trusts and private equity firms, and just continued to proliferate and grow their brand families. So as they've sort of tapped out or really expanded significantly in the U.S., of course, there's going to be more opportunities in the U.S. They're looking for brand expansion internationally. India and China continue to be big growth markets for them. But domestically, they're looking to expand their hotel expertise to other sectors of hospitality. So they're entering cruise lines, they're entering credit card companies, they're entering experience companies, and they're trying to tie their point ecosystem so you can cash out points at restaurants, at lounges, at concerts. And so it wouldn't be surprised if someday you live in a Marriott-branded apartment or you go on a Marriott-branded cruise. And I think that's coming.
So cool. I mean, I think it's cool. It's cool just to see it evolve. And you make me think that, American Express has been doing that really consistently for decades. I had the privilege of being invited to the U.S. Open yesterday, and American Express sponsored almost everything at the U.S. Open in Pinehurst. And you any convenience, food, beverage concession, you get 10% off if you use your American Express card. Which I couldn't use because it wasn't a company trip, and I don't have a personal one. So, but the point was, American Express dominates, at least for the next, until the tournament's over on Sunday. It dominates this massive event. One of the 4 major tournaments in the year, golf tournaments, and I have seen, just because I happen to be a Marriott Bonvoy member, and I'm not a super loyal one, but I use it frequently. They're doing the same thing. The Bonvoy brand is really it seems to me to be copying what American Express has anchored into. And one example is experiences and concerts and foodie events. So fascinating.
That's right.
I never knew that was taking place.
It's an ecosystem, and it will creep up on you until all of a sudden it's very apparent that is the world. And by being a Bonvoy member or a Hilton Honors member, you have this entire ecosystem.
Is Marriott still the largest in the world in terms of hospitality brand?
As far as number of hotel brands, yes. I don't know who holds the record for number of hotels today, but Marriott certainly has their share of brands.
Maybe we wrap up on this. Why do brands like Marriott and Hilton and others continue to have these little sub-brands? Why is that? Because I'll see you mentioned Curio, I've stayed in many AC Marriotts. Like, what is the logic or the strategy behind that?
Well, they're publicly traded companies, so they have to continue to grow. So their strategy is always growth. There is a wave of brands that sort of peak or become the elephant in the room for a certain period of time, and then they're no longer the shiniest, newest elephant in the room, and they start to decline. And so they're always looking for conversion opportunities. So to take something that used to be this brand, and now they've created a new brand so they can convert them to a different brand, but keep them within the system while they continue to build more of brand A while converting old brand A's into brand B's. There's conversion across brands from a Hilton to a Marriott or vice versa. There is something to be said for customer differentiation. They are trying to speak to different audiences. But one of the key things is that when you sign a franchise for a brand, there's something called an area protection. So when you sign that brand A, nobody else can build that brand A within 10 miles. So if there's enough demand in that market for more Hilton or more Marriott product, but that brand is already accounted for, well, they might need to come up with a brand B that is differentiated, that will not necessarily steal from brand A, but will allow more people into the Hilton or Marriott or Hyatt ecosystem and still stay within that market.
That is the never-ending challenge of being a public company.
That's right.
It's always about growth.
Forever grow.
All right. So, dude, you're blowing my mind, and this is so much fun, and I know our listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this. But let's end this episode, Jeremy, and on the other side, you and I are going to start talking about a project that happens to have piqued your interest, and also happens to be the largest residential home in the United States. So stay tuned for episode 2. We're going to continue our conversation with Jeremy Gilston and all things hospitality. And thanks, everybody, for listening to the Undeniable Podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jeremy Gilston. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the hospitality industry, all things planning and consulting for hotels and conference centers. We talked a little bit about glamping, short-term rentals, the whole ecosystem. And the conversation went so long, we broke it into 2 parts. So now you're going to hopefully stay tuned for part 2 of the conversation with Jeremy Gilston. And we dive into a really special place near and dear to my heart here in North Carolina. So check out part 2, the conversation with Jeremy from the company Woodworth Core. I know you're going to love it.